Of the two best SEC teams, Alabama and Tennessee, one is trustworthy and the other is not. Wednesday night was a perfect example of why.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and I want to thank you for joining us. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/locked on today to get started. Coming up on the show, we're going to check in on the Indiana Hoosiers with the host of Locked On Hoosiers, Mr. Jacob Rude. But first, let's get to some Wednesday night action, starting with the SEC. And here it is, right out of the gate. I'm going to give it to you as plainly as I can. The Tennessee Volunteers will not make the 2023 Final Four. They've never made one before, and this year will not be the first. Legitimately, you will, if you see any Final Four picks that I make this year, you will not see a big orange T in any of them. Legitimately, Tennessee could go undefeated the rest of the regular season. They could win the SEC tournament title. I don't care. I don't care how stout this defense is, and boy, it is stout. The number one defense in the nation. I don't care that they're currently sixth in the AP poll. I don't care how high they are at KenPom or in the net or at Torvik, and they're top three in all of those. What's the problem? This offense. It just simply cannot support this team for 4 wins in a row. It's not capable of doing that. It's not proven to me all season long that it can, and there's no reason to start believing that it will now. And before anyone even says it, no, this is not a knee-jerk reaction to Wednesday night's buzzer-beating 66-65 loss at Vanderbilt, although that certainly doesn't help matters. I wrote this note as the game was still very much in doubt. Don't trust Tennessee, regardless of if they come back. It's like, you ever seen the movie Memento, one of Christopher Nolan's first movies, where the guy has short-term memory loss, and so he just writes stuff all over his body. He's like, don't trust whomever. It's like, I wrote that note to myself. I don't care. Or a Draft Day where Kevin Costner is like, no matter what, this is the guy I want, right? Like, this is the deal. Don't trust Tennessee. I don't care how they try to trick you the rest of the season. Do not trust them. Now, on the flip side of this conversation, Alabama continues to be insanely impressive to me. They have now won, after just kind of having their way with Florida on Wednesday night. They have now won 12 of 13. They're undefeated in SEC play, 11-0. Of those past 12 wins, 12 of the last 13 games, 11 of them have been by double digits. 21 wins they have this entire season. 17 of them have been by double digits. Yes, you're hearing me correctly. Alabama has won 21 games, and only 4 of them have been by single-digit margins. They are just destroying their opponents. And it's not like they're playing slot. Like, you might hear that and think, oh, well, they must have played a weak non-conference schedule. Maybe they've lucked out in who they've played in SEC play. Don't want to hear that noise. Here's why. They're not playing slouches. Let's go by some KenPom numbers. Their non-conference schedule, Alabama's, was seventh ranked non-conference schedule at KenPom in terms of strength of schedule. Excuse me. You know how many other high major teams are in the top 10 in that? 0. North Carolina is the next closest at 15 in terms of non-conference strength of schedule. Alabama was right there in the non-con. And it's not like they've fallen off since entering conference play. I know the Big 12 is the best conference, but their entire strength of schedule is 10th in the nation. So Alabama is killing teams, and they're killing really good teams. Take this team, and you trust them. On the other side of the SEC ledger, do not trust the Tennessee Volunteers. Alabama, yes. Tennessee, no. You with me? Good. So if you're filling out a bracket and someone asks you, hey, Jimmy, we'll make that your name, dear listener. Hey, Jimmy, which of these 2 top SEC teams that's never been to the Final Four before should I advance in my bracket? Tennessee or Alabama? You know the right answer, and don't you dare question it. Now, of course, watch. You know how it's going to end up going now, and please come back and find me at that point because I deserve it. But hear me. Now, the good news, we are a week away. Next Wednesday night, Alabama travels to Knoxville, Alabama at Tennessee. Their one and only regular season matchup this season, unfortunately. But keep in mind, no, a Tennessee win that night does not validate them. I'm going to keep saying that until I'm blue in the face. Don't trust Tennessee. Okay, very good. A couple other quick things from Wednesday night before we get to talking about Indiana. Number 3, Alabama was not the only top team to just have an absolute blowout on Wednesday. Number 2, Houston did their own work. And I don't want to miss this. Like, they played Tulsa, who, bless their heart, they're just plain bad. Houston wins 80-42. All the same, here's why I want to talk about it. Houston ends the first half on a 39-8 run. Yeah, you heard me right. 39-8 run. And perhaps the even more astonishing statistical reason I bring this game up, Marcus Sasser at halftime, Marcus Sasser 19, Tulsa 18. That's right. Marcus Sasser outscored the entire Tulsa roster in the first half of this game, and then Houston cruises on in home, no problems there. So Houston alive and well and kicking in the AAC. A couple other quick results from Wednesday night. Tennessee was not the only top 15 team to fall. Number 11, Iowa State, travels to West Virginia and loses 76-71. A pretty entertaining game, although West Virginia led the majority of the first half. Iowa State started 2-0, but then West Virginia got ahead and never trailed again until Iowa State punched back in the second half, did a nice job, but West Virginia was right there. They took the lead back and had it for a while. And here's the closing stretch. Iowa State gets a layup from Jaron Holmes with like a minute 29 to go. They're up 71-70. And you remember that final score, 76-71? That means West Virginia, over the final 89 seconds, goes on a 6-0 run to put down Iowa State. And that's an Iowa State team that prides itself on its defense. You could compare them to Tennessee, but I trust their offense a lot more than Tennessee. So don't think of it in that way. And man, the Big 12 is just brutal. Remember, we've talked about probably the team that wins this conference is that who kind of beats up on Texas Tech, West Virginia, and the Oklahoma schools. Well, Iowa State has not done that. They have 4 league losses, 3 of which are to those 4 schools. Remember that historic letdown against Texas Tech this game and then against one of the Oklahoma schools. Like you just can't do it. The funny thing, though, is they're beating some of the other top tier schools. And so balancing it out in that way. So Iowa State, still trust them, but it's just, I think this is more about the Big 12 is a gauntlet, an absolute gauntlet. However, another team in the Big 12 that let's not let them sneak up on us, shall we say that. Sleep on Baylor, the Bears, at your own risk. In fact, never sleep on a Bear. That's dangerous. That's some just free advice from me to you today. This team is coming back. Just a reminder, Jonathan Tchamwa is back now and playing. Baylor's ready to go. Watch out. Don't sleep on them. Well, as we said, coming up in just a second, we're going to get into some Indiana basketball with Mr. Jacob Rude. Back-to-back big-time wins for the Hoosiers. What's ahead and how did they do that? We're going to talk about it in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sports book in all of America. And if you're new to FanDuel, even better, they have so many great features that makes betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. Plus, the app is safe, secure, and it's super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid instantly you're winning. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim that no sweat first bet on Super Bowl Once again, that's fanduel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Well, we might not have thought this earlier in January, but the Indiana Hoosiers all of a sudden are rolling, coming off a weekend win over the number one team in the land, Purdue, handing them just their second loss of the season, and then following it up by not having the emotional breakdown you expect by knocking off Rutgers on Tuesday night. Jacob Rude from Locked On Hoosiers is here with us today to unpack where Indiana's at right now, these games, what's been going on, and then in a little bit, we will forecast ahead to the rest of the season and what to expect out of this wacky Big Ten. But Jacob, let's start there. Back on Saturday in Ascension, me back to the emotion of that moment, if you would, before we even talk about the outcome of the game. What was the feeling you got from the Indiana fan base, the expectations? Obviously coming into that game, there had been a loss at Maryland just before, and so where was the collective mindset?
Certainly excitement. That was probably everybody kind of in recent memory. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. In recent memory, IU against Michigan in 2013, it was number 1 versus number 3. It's kind of this holy grail of like the environment in Assembly Hall. It was madness. And there were a lot of comparisons to that on Saturday heading into that game. Fans had lined up like 6-8 hours beforehand. They were making like plans so that the lines could be inside because it was like frigid outside. I think it was in the 30s on Saturday. So it's a fan base that they'd gotten back behind Indiana. Like you said, it looked grim there for a while. They'd gotten back behind Indiana. It really, that Maryland loss, it was frustrating, but it didn't really dampen anything. I mean, with a Purdue game, a rivalry game like that, it doesn't take a lot to be excited. And IU's just kind of had this circled all year. Purdue's been really good. And so IU always has that circled, and there's always this big brother, little brother rivalry with whoever's the big brother and little brother, kind of depends, but IU likes to think it is. So they always kind of have that circled, wanting to kind of put Purdue in its place. And on this occasion, it worked. It hadn't worked a lot. They'd beaten us 9 times before last season. So we had been the little brother for a while, but on this occasion, it was an incredible atmosphere and just a ton of emotion heading into that one.
I'll tell you this, Trayce Jackson-Davis looked like the little brother standing there next to Zach Edey, but
everybody
does. Goodness gracious. But I mean, coming into this game, let's talk about the game itself a little bit. At halftime, the Hoosiers are up 15. Obviously, Zach Edey got his in this game, finishes with 33. But outside of him, only Fletcher Lawyer got to double digits for Purdue. What was kind of Mike Woodson's game plan that allowed the Hoosiers to bring this one together?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily let Zach Edey do whatever and just kind of shut everyone else down explicitly. That's kind of what it became. Trayce Jackson-Davis did what he could on Zach Edey. He's just a really damn good player. And so it was still, there was a lot of focus on the other guys and not letting them beat you as well, because you kind of know Edey's going to get what he's going to get. It's a lot of the other guys that when they have contributions, it's what really does you in. So Indiana really focused on putting pressure on that kind of young backcourt and not even cutting off the service to Edey early on. That's how they get that big lead in the first half. A ton of turnovers. That atmosphere kind of paid off, in that Purdue looked very rattled for probably the first time all season in the first half. And I think they had 9 turnovers in the first 10 minutes, something along those lines. So it was a defensive intensity that Indiana's had. They had it a lot last year. It kind of wavered this year. That's been one of the biggest differences in this recent run, is that's come back. And you really saw it in that first half, because they were turning Purdue over. They weren't even letting the ball get to Edey, because, I mean, as you saw in the second half, once it gets to him, it's kind of too late at that point. And so
game over.
They weren't even letting him get the ball. And that was kind of the biggest part to getting up 15 points at halftime.
Well, speaking of that Indiana backcourt and some problems for Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith there, there was a scary moment for Jalen Hood-Schifino in this game. It was basically, as I saw it, it was TJD taking over the first half, JHS taking over the second half.
Yep.
But goodness gracious, this guy though just gets back up and gets right back to it. What are the feelings there as that happens? You're like, man, Jalen Hood-Schifino could be down. This could be the thing that allows Purdue to come back and win this thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit of here we go again is kind of what was seeping in because we'd already don't have Xavier Johnson.
Right.
We didn't have Race Thompson for it was about 5-6 games or so. They've battled a lot of injuries. Trayce was far from 100% early in the season with some back injuries. So IU has been a little bit luckier in terms of injuries and just that nobody else is getting injured. They're trying to bring guys back. So when he went down, it was kind of like, are you serious? Like we had just gotten the ship righted again. And it was a little scary. He kind of talked about it afterwards and he said his leg kind of crumpled, but then like it was just more like he was scared of what might have happened. And once he got up and like walked around, he's like, oh, I'm fine. And so he just went out and kind of dominated down the stretch and sealed the game. So it was a scary moment, but I'm glad he's healthy because he has been a stud and kind of everything that we expected him to be. There've been some off nights as there are with freshmen, but I mean, especially the end of that game, he made some of the biggest plays of the night.
Yes, indeed. And not as big a game like against Rutgers, kind of cooled off a little bit on Tuesday night. But yes, he was so integral to the second half of that game. Now, going back to the Trayce Jackson-Davis of it all, this dude just is piling up performances. Let me remind everyone, Purdue, 25 points, 7 rebounds, a steal, an assist, 5 blocks, Jacob Rude. And then Rutgers, 20 points, 18 rebounds, 6 assists. This dude is 4 assists shy of a triple-double on Tuesday night and a block. What is Trayce Jackson-Davis doing to just turn this up to the next level?
He's doing everything. It has been something special to watch. It kind of flipped. He was injured, like I said, early in the season. He wasn't 100%. We didn't really notice much of the time, but those Kansas and Arizona games, he wasn't 100%. He didn't play over the holiday period. He went like 3.5 weeks between games. And even when he came back against Iowa, he wasn't 100%. But I mean, basically since that Iowa game through last night, which is most of Big Ten play, it's 23 points, 14 rebounds, and 54% shooting with 3.5 blocks a game. Like,
I think he's doing things.
Yeah, I'll settle for that.
If we have to.
He's doing things where it's like last night, for example, I don't know how much I was in the minority or not, but like you watch him play and it's like, man, he's having a good Trayce game. And then you look and it's 20-18 and 6. And it's like, oh damn, that's like a really good game. So like, he's kind of almost normalized some of these games where like, it's absolutely absurd what he's doing. When you look like last night's an example, I looked at the end of the game and I was like, oh God, he almost has 20 and 20. And so I like type it in and look, and like this is only the 13th time that stat line's happened since 2010. And it each time he plays, he seems to do something along those lines where it's like, oh, this has only happened twice since 1990, or he's his month of January. It was like it had only happened like Tim Duncan and I can't remember the other person, that like the only 2 people to have ever averaged that over a month. And so it's like he's playing at a level where it's hard to even like explain. Like he's just playing at this absurd level, national player of the year, where like he's just putting the team on his back. Everybody knows who's getting the ball, what he's going to do. And he has just such an array of moves and an ability to get to the rim. And IU, Mike Woodson's done a good job of, there were times last year where it was just kind of throw the ball into him and then just let things happen. And they've done a better job of getting him the ball in positions where he can take advantage of defenders, and he's on the move a little bit more. And it's not just simply walk the ball up the court, throw it into the post, have 4 guys stare at him and see what happens. There's a lot more movement that has led to absurd play. I've never seen in college anybody kind of play like this. He's doing it on both ends of the floor. He's everything. IU's played well as a team in a lot of regards, but offensively, he's everything for this team. So to come in every night and know you're like the number one thing at the top of the scouting report and still be able to do this has been something special to watch.
That and yet is massive to me, to be the number one on the scouting report. And yet you keep doing this over and over again. Love to see how Mike Woodson is taking advantage of what Trayce Jackson-Davis is able to do that really not many other bigs around the nation are. Well, hopefully he will be able to continue this, and it's going to spur on continued success for the Hoosiers down the stretch. That's the hope for the folks in Bloomington, Indiana, anyway. What's that going to look like? We'll talk about it in just a second. Okay, Indiana. Jacob Rude has won 7 of their last 8 games after that loss at Penn State, which capped a 3-game losing streak with just a loss to Maryland in the midst of it. Right now, as we record, there are 7 games left in the Big Ten season, at least for Indiana. Some good news. Race Thompson has been back of late, continuing to work his way in. As we look down the stretch for Mike Woodson's club, I think one of the biggest glaring question marks to help really get to where the Hoosiers want to get is, where are we at with Xavier Johnson?
That's a great question. There have been improvements in kind of the timeline. IU is always very murky about timelines with any athlete injury. It's just kind of a program policy, women's basketball, men's basketball, football, whatever it is. So he went down. They told us he had surgery. We don't know what the injury was. When it first happened, though, there was a lot of if he comes back, and we hope he comes back. And now it's more, I'll be back, but we don't know when. Like Andy Katz in the Rutgers game said he talked to Xavier Johnson. Xavier Johnson said he'll be back this season. But as you said, there's only 7 games left. So we don't really know when he's coming back. He has been working out before games, going through some shoot around stuff and some drills and just general workout. He hasn't done anything more than that publicly. He still comes out in a walking boot, which I know a lot of times is just kind of precautionary. But yeah, it's so there isn't a timeline. It seems like he's close, but again, as you said, there's not a lot of time left. There's only about 3 weeks left in the regular season. So there hasn't been a lot of time where we've had the starting 5 that we expected coming into the season. The more time that we can get that group together and playing, the better, because they're just simply running out of time now.
Running out of time is the thing. Got to get Xavier Johnson back in and going, because as we know, in March, elite guard play is what helps seal the deal. Speaking of which, it feels like right now, as we've kind of been talking about, it's the 2 triple initialed guys who are the 2-headed monster of this team, and Trayce Jackson-Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino. Jacob, I think the thing that's important that a lot of people are going to want to look at is, when teams are able to eliminate one or both of those guys, who is that third person to rise up? Is it Xavier Johnson if he gets back? Is it Race Thompson? Who can consistently step in and be like, hey, I'm going to be the third amigo. Give me that sombrero and let's rock this thing.
The good news is, as we've kind of said, Trayce has been so good. They haven't needed that necessarily, but there have been nights where Jalen has struggled a bit, and it's kind of a revolving door. Against Rutgers, it was Miller Kopp, who had 18 points. It's this odd thing where he just always plays incredibly well against Rutgers. I'm sure Rutgers fans absolutely hate it, but he always plays really well against them. I think his 2 highest scoring games this season are against Rutgers. But there's been different guys. Against Wisconsin earlier in the season, it was Trey Galloway and Tamar Bates. There's been times against Illinois in the first half, it was Malik Renew. There's just kind of this surrounding cast. Early in the year, we talked a lot about the depth IU had. That depth was immediately put to test, and that was one of the reasons IU struggled so much, is that having kind of depth off the bench, especially when it's young guys, is one thing, but a lot of those guys were thrust into positions they kind of weren't ready for, and so they had to learn real quick how to survive. The result is now they know how to survive. So your Tamar Bateses, your Trey Galloways, your Miller Kopps, Malik Renews, all those guys have those game reps now, are much more comfortable. There isn't any one guy that ends up being the third guy. Ideally, it'll be Xavier Johnson when he comes back. He was a second guy on the team early in the season. So it would be some combination of those three if everything goes according to plan when he comes back. But the benefit for Indiana is the depth they've had and the ability for them to just have somebody step up on any given night.
And that's allowed Jalen Hood-Schifino to certainly lean into what he's going to have to do more and more. The question just always becomes, we've seen these late season re-entries go really well, and we've seen them go really poorly. And so hopefully for Indiana folks out there, Xavier Johnson's reemergence, whenever that is, will be a positive. For me, as I look at it, Jacob, one of the things that, you kind of wish you already knew what that third is so that you could have it pretty solidly. But in terms of other teams scouting, you kind of like that fluidity of, it's going to be Trayce, 75% of the time it's going to be Jalen. And then outside of that, good luck figuring out who to stop on any given night, because any of these dudes could go for 15 or 20. And while you might like to cement that third, and that was even the question I was asking, there's a lot of potential benefit to the unknown of who number 3 might be in this thing. Now, as we look down the stretch to this 7-game run that's left that we already talked about, as we record, Indiana is 17-7 overall, 8-5 in Big Ten play. As we were talking about before we got on, there are behind Purdue and then ahead of Nebraska, Ohio State, which yikes, what's happened to them, and Minnesota. There are 10 teams within 2 games of second place in the loss column. 6 of them are all knotted with 5 losses in the loss column right now. And so as I look specifically at Indiana's closing run, at Michigan, at Northwestern, home Illinois, at Michigan State, at Purdue, that's a doozy back-to-back right there. And then you wrap up with home to Iowa, home to Michigan. If I'm handicapping this thing, I'm probably looking at 4-3. And I know that might seem like negative, but man, in this muddled Big Ten, that's probably actually like just to go above 500 down the stretch is a big win. Let me give it to you over under that 4 wins and 3 losses that I'm throwing out.
That feels fair. Looking at the schedule, if I had to pick, I would probably say over just because of how well Indiana's playing. The caveat is this team still has kind of struggled away from home a little bit. They beat Illinois, but I mean, that was one of Trayce's greatest games ever in that one. He had 35, 9, and 5 with 3 blocks. And so they won that game. Even against Minnesota, when Minnesota was down to like 7 people, they made that game way too close. Yeah. The Maryland game you mentioned is one they lost. They're still not a great road team, and 4 of those games left are against road teams. Not the as difficult of road games. That's right. Michigan and Northwestern are the easier of the two road games they've had this season outside of Minnesota. And then I'm going to back this team at home at this point in any game. So they're going to be favored in at least 3 of those games. And I think they could potentially win, Michigan, Northwestern, something like that. So the stretch they just went through the last 4 games was kind of the big, toughest stretch they had left. Home against Ohio State, which, I mean, I guess at the time felt like a big game. It's as you said, I don't know what's happened to Ohio State. But then at Maryland, who is just unbelievable at home for some reason.
Yeah, they've got big splits.
Yeah, and then Purdue and Rutgers back-to-back. To go 3-1 during that stretch, I think is realistically is about as good as you could have expected. So 4-3 probably seems about right. If anything, I might lean a little bit more towards 5-2, but I wouldn't be mad going 4-3 the rest of the way because, as you said, the Big Ten is just kind of a mess. 4-3 might be enough to finish second in the Big Ten the rest of the way. I think IU really at this point is just kind of eyeing the double bye, finishing in the top 4 spots, and
that's the goal.
Yeah, boosting that resume with any kind of big wins. I don't know that there's anything that's going to really boost the resume outside of that Purdue game left the rest of the season, but just kind of maintaining. They're kind of a 4 or 5 seed right now based on most bracketology. So 4-3 probably seems pretty realistic to me.
I think so too, but I also wouldn't bat an eye and have no quibble with that 5-2. Ken Palm predicts a 5-2 record down the stretch there. Somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago whom I thought would be second in the Big Ten. And at that point, I said I'd be curious to see what Michigan State, how they close. But if I were picking again today, boy, I have besmirched the Indiana Hoosiers, and I would circle back around and take Mike Woodson's club if I were re-answering that question again today. Should be a great race down the stretch. Pun not intended, but I should have down the stretch of the Big Ten season. Jacob Rude, thank you so much for joining us on today's show.
As always.
That's it for today's show. My thanks to Jacob Rude for joining us. And don't forget, I'm going to tell you one more time, don't trust Tennessee. Give me the Crimson Tide all day long. Please make sure to subscribe to the show, smash the like button, and comment. We're getting close to that 500 marker on YouTube. Would love for you to help us get there. Please leave the show a review on iTunes. That helps so much as well. As always, my apologies to the Lawyer family, and until tomorrow, peace.